Thank you so much. It is so wonderful to be back. And thank you, JLF, for inviting me once again and inviting me with my favorite person to be having this conversation. We talk about conversations a lot, and I'm hoping that by the end of this session, when you leave this place, you would have had a better understanding of searching intersections, searching equity. I am not going to spend any more time on introductions, because as much as I love these JLF guys, they're also quite dictatorial about time. So even before I start, there is a lady going to be out there in wings with time and everything. So reminding me about the time. So I am not going to waste any time on introduction. I am straight away going to go to our topic today. And I'm sure most of you understand or have read about caste and social dynamics in India. It is something that we have been talking about for a very long time, for decades, yet we have not been able to have an honest conversation about caste. This book, Makers of Modern Dalit History, which has been written by Sudarshan Ramabhadran and Guru Prakash Paswan, who is here right now, to me is one of the very first attempts at having an honest conversation about where we have come from, where we are right now, acknowledging our failures very honestly, and at the same time, understanding where we need to go, and also understanding the successes that we have had. Because we have had some successes. We are not where we were 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So acknowledging the failures, understanding the successes, and then giving us a sort of blueprint, so to speak, about where we need to go from here. So, Guru, I was reading this book again last night because I read it when it came out first. And as always, the introduction, I would like to tell the audience that this book has profiles of 18 great Indians, Dalit thinkers, and some of them are Dalit thinkers. They're from all aspects of the society. They are jurists, they're from economists, artists, politicians, from all, it's a good cross-section of everything. But before that, you must read a longish introduction, which I was just talking to you about, where they give a good sense of, if you understand nothing about caste in India, it will give you a good sense of where we are today. Guru, my first question again, when I was reading it yesterday, that out of these 18 profiles, some of them we know very well. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, for example, he's been written about so much. Kabir, for example, his poetry is part of our everyday lives. Babu Jagjeevan Ram, at least people who follow politics in India know him. So there is that group. And then there are people like Ayan Gali, who I first actually read about in your book. Or there are people like Jogendranath Mandal, who's been vilified and who we don't know about. So how did you choose these 18 people, and why did you choose them? Because you talk about makers of modern Dalit history, but you also put Ved Vyas there, and you also put Valmiki there. And so I didn't quite understand how were these 18 people chosen?
Thank you so much, Sunanda ji, for this wonderful introduction, and thank you so much, the organizers, for having this discussion, an independent, objective discussion on Dalit history. And I sort of understand from where Sunanda ji is coming from on what was the need. Unfortunately, there is a lot of scarcity when it comes to real academic sources on Dalit issues. Like whatever little has been done, it's on the extreme ends. Like you do an academic examination, you do an objective analysis, you will find that the Dalit literature is generally of the literature of the atrocities, literature of discrimination, which is obviously true to a certain extent. Caste structure has been a problem. Even today, there are multiple incidents where we see people who are at the receiving ends, how there has been a sort of structural exclusion of individuals on the basis of caste. But that is one side of the spectrum. What we unfortunately don't speak about, like you said, like today for that matter, today in India, we have a woman from the tribal community as the constitutional head of state. Draupadi Murmu. But how many such conversations are happening here in the United States? How many of you, idly, what our community, academic initiatives would have taken events in each and every 50 states of the United States to celebrate the rise of such a woman? We have hundreds of such examples where people from the marginalized, the disadvantaged communities today are at critical decision-making positions. And similarly, we were facing this problem. Icons are important. Icons generate inspiration. Kabir, Ambedkar. To my generation, Sunandaji, when we were growing up in schools and in universities, unfortunately, Ambedkar was an intellectual colossus. He was an intellectual giant. But to my generation, we were only taught that Ambedkar was a leader of the depressed classes.
Yeah.
That was only one facet of Baba
Or he wrote
Saheb Ambedkar.
Constitution. That was about it.
Exactly. But unfortunately, and I'm sure we should do a phenomenal work on Ambedkar. That's really important, a deep dive into the life of Ambedkar. He was a phenomenal economist. The sort of work which he has done in that time and age when scholars from India, they were going to England for their higher studies, Ambedkar chooses Columbia.
Yeah.
Instead of law, he chooses humanities, sociology, economics. But unfortunately, we are not told about his works, let's say, on provincial federalism.
Yeah. He was also a free market, correct me if I'm wrong, he was also a free market person, and I didn't know that for a long time because we were never taught that.
Absolutely, absolutely. He was someone who was supporting capitalism and how sort of free market can give opportunities and create level playing field for individuals. Foreign policy visionary. In the course of my research, I realized that Ambedkar, in one of his speeches, he warns the then Prime Minister that we should have Tibet as a buffer state between India and China. And only today we realize how far-reaching his vision was. Ambedkar, in one of his speeches in 1952, in Lucknow University, while he was addressing young students, he categorically says that if Mao had any faith in the principles of Panchsheel, he would have treated Buddhists in his country differently. So in a way, there are so many aspects to his personality. His views on economics, his views on anthropology, his views on religion for that matter. On multiple occasions, he has said that character is important for the youngsters of my country. And character only comes from religion, spiritual values, the way Ambedkar advocated temple entry movement as well, on multiple occasions at multiple places. So these icons, apart from Baba Saheb Ambedkar, we have had Babu Jagjivan Ram. In the course of our history, in the course of our political history, we have had a Dalit to become the first ever Deputy Prime Minister of the country. Babu
and
Jagjivan
defense
Ram.
minister at the most important time, wartime defense minister who won the war at that time with the 1971 war. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. And that aspect we have mentioned, and none other than Henry Kissinger himself. He admits that Babu Jagjivan Ram has been the most hawkish defense minister in the history of the world. So look at that. 1971 war. It created a new nation, Bangladesh. Babu Jagjivan Ram, Kanshi Ram, K.R. Narayanan, Ambedkar, Rani Jhalkari Bai, Dakshayani Velayudhan, one of my favorite characters from the book. Dakshayani Velayudhan, the only Dalit woman member in the Constituent Assembly while we were framing our constitution. So I find it really humorous, Randaji, because I've been touring US, I've been here for last 4-5 days, and there is a different level of conversation on how there is sort of a narrative on Dalits which is shaping up in this country. Dalits have been at the forefront of our culture, civilization, and our nation.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this is not being spoken about. You mentioned about Vedvyas, you mentioned about Valmiki. So, friends, 3 important documents. I would say there are 3 important documents which are very central to our vision and imagination. The Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and the Constitution of India. The Mahabharata was authored by a Dalit. Ramayana was authored by a Dalit. The Constitution of India was authored by a Dalit. So where there is a question arises of Dalit not being part of India or the Indian imagination.
Yeah.
So these were some of the thoughts and musings when we obviously decided
chose
on
these 18
Correct.
Because they are great Dalit icons, but they're also makers of modern India in the sense, because we cannot even imagine modern India without the poetry of Kabir or without the epics of Ramayana and Mahabharata. Also, once we talk about icons, Guru, but then the politics comes in. For example, social justice movements all over the world have been hijacked by the politics of the day. There's very little we can do to change that, because that's something that is inevitable. However, you wrote a very refreshing thing in your book. You said that the Dalit narrative, if we are to search for equity, Dalit narrative needs to be depoliticized. You have often, and I heard you many times, and you often said that Dalits should not become the victim of social justice, that paradigm. Why do you say that?
I mean, that's interesting that you speak of social justice, a cause which is dear to my heart and a lot of us here. Social justice is definitely a cornerstone of any republic imagination. But I would again like to go back to Ambedkar. He makes a very prophetic statement. He says, on 26th of January 1950, India is going to enter into a life of contradictions. We will have equality in politics with the principle of one man, one vote, but we will have gross inequality in our social and economic life. So this is a warning to the Indian political leadership which Ambedkar is giving. So social justice is definitely, and social justice remains one of our most cherished goals. But again, you said about equity, and again a conversation about diversity, equity and inclusion, which is here. That is something which has always been an integral part of our society. Like I mentioned about Babu Jagjeevan Ram, I mentioned about Ambedkar, Kanshiram for that matter, Mayawati. Mayawati, a woman from the Dalit community, she has become the chief minister of the largest Indian state, Uttar Pradesh. Today, in Uttar Pradesh, for the first time, we have 3 Dalit women members in the Council of Ministry.
Yeah.
So somehow, our approach, definitely, I am not making a case here that so much has been done and we don't need to do anything more. There is always a scope for more inclusive atmosphere, a more sort of place where social justice is not just a slogan but a commitment for each and every one of us. But unfortunately, what has happened, that the political parties back home, how they have perverted the discourse on social justice. Like the parties based on the principles of social justice, they're not venturing to look beyond their families, and that is the reason why the opposition is losing all vision and imagination. But how do we sort of portray our Dalit brothers and sisters not in the lens of victim? Because I am of this considered opinion that Dalits have been the cultural and civilizational soldiers of India.
Yeah.
Shahid Udham Singh, for that matter. Shahid Udham Singh is not an upper caste Hindu. He decides on the day of Jallianwala Bagh that I'm going to avenge this. He travels. He comes to Europe, forms different institutions like Gadar Party. He comes to UK. He is not a upper caste Hindu. He's a Dalit Bahujan. Rani Jhalkari Bai, a Dalit woman, fights hand in hand with someone like Rani Lakshmi Bai in Jhansi against the Britishers. Dakshayani Vilayudhan, Hundreds of such icons must be identified and celebrated, not only in India, but globally as a symbol of inspiration. And this has been one of our objective behind writing this book.
So do you feel the social justice movements that have happened in India till now have failed in recognizing Dalit icons that you mentioned right now, so that Dalits would also feel part of mainstream? Because all these icons have fought for mainstream India, fought with mainstream India, yet we don't know about them. We have not been talked about, we don't talk about them, we're not told about them, and that's how they sort of propagate victimhood. So do you feel social justice movements have failed the Dalit cause till now?
I look at it differently, Sunandaji. So, unfortunately, what has been happening till now, because obviously because of historical oppression, we haven't had sufficient Dalit voices. Unless you have a voice, you don't have a choice.
Right.
Till now, in the name of social justice, in the name of inclusion, what we have seen is nothing but behalfism. Dalits were never a real-time stakeholder in the crafting or making of the Dalit discourse. People who were the movers and shakers of the Dalit narrative, who were drafting the Dalit narrative, who were shaping conversation on Dalit narrative, Dalits were never ever taken as a stakeholder. And that is where I see a problem.
Yeah.
You look at the Dalit literature itself, how many Dalits themselves with the lived experience of a Dalit have written such a book?
Yeah.
That's the unfortunate part. And that is what, I mean, this is where people miss the point.
I think that is also what the leftist organizations or left in India needs to do some introspection, because they have been at the forefront of social justice movements, and yet we have not seen a book like this emerge from any of the leftist quarters till now. There is some introspection that needs to go in left liberal circles as well, because I think they have propagated this idea of victimhood that you talk about, and the idea of not talking about Dalit icons as much as they should have talked about. So would you agree with that?
100%, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sunandaji, left or right, my concern is that if Dalits are stakeholders, if Dalits are actually people either on either side of the spectrum,
right,
who are getting to speak when it comes to Dalit issues. You rightly pointed out what left has done, and you look at their project. So you look at the left's weekly from 1942 to 1960, it's called People's Voice. They have criticized Ambedkar left, right and center. Their position on Ambedkar, their position on social justice, their position on Dalit issues have constantly evolved. In the first occasion, in the first time in our history, we are seeing a Dalit as a member of the highest decision-making body of the left, which is the Politburo in India. Left parties has been in existence for quite some time.
Yeah.
Before any of our political establishment. Obviously, Congress came, but left also in 1915, M.N. Roy starts this left organizational movement in India. But till now, since 1915, for the first time, we have a Dalit member as a Politburo member in the left political party in the form of Rajkumarji from West Bengal.
Yeah.
So this is how you form a narrative. The only concern, like I, as someone with lived experience, I am comfortable in venturing beyond the conventional definitions of left and right. I am okay with left, but it has to be a Dalit speaking on behalf of Dalits.
Right. And not just symbolism. And that brings me to the question of symbolism that we often talk about. Symbolism is important. I agree. I agree that we need to have icons. I agree that we need to talk about heroes. I agree that we need to have pictures and posters and, monuments dedicated to them. I agree with all that. However, I also get a little cringy when I see, and this happens on both sides of the spectrum, a dinner at Dalit's family or a photo op at Dalit's family. It makes me cringe because I feel that is empty symbolism, because there is also symbolism of two kinds. There is real symbolism and there is empty symbolism. So do you think that there has also been a lot of empty symbolism that has been going on, because of which Dalit rights, the movement of Dalit rights and the distance we should have covered, we have not been able to cover, even though we think we have covered it, but we haven't, because the real world is always different from what is covered on the front pages of newspapers.
That's a very interesting observation, Surendraji. But we must understand that there is a thin line of difference when it comes to symbolism and realism. So when I say, like even today, and I don't shy away from admitting that, the atrocity on Dalits in different parts of India, it's still there. And it is a social problem. When you say symbolism, you see, at some parts, in the rural parts, it's important that you go have a conversation with them. But I look at it differently. So there are three stages. There are three stages when it comes to this issue. The first generation, 100 years ago, Dalits had to face the challenges of sitting. S-I-T-T-I-N-G, sitting. People were unwilling to sit with them.
Yeah.
The second challenge was eating. E-A-T-I-N-G, people were unwilling to share meals with them. Sitting and eating has gone, but now the process is witting. Can we wit with Dalits? Can we have such conversations? Can we have Dalits at critical decision-making positions in civil society, in media, in press, in forums like this, where you have someone with the lived experience speaking about it dispassionately and objectively? So I put it like this: sitting, eating, and now witting. So this process of witting, and this is something which I call witting. Now there is a section that is focusing on witting, but again, there is huge investment of people who want still to have this process of sitting and eating. But this churning is happening, and maybe eventually this process of witting will have a more national appeal.
So you feel it's a journey, and they will eventually, people who do this, they will eventually get into that. Because there is also this problem of creating, when we talk about social justice, that is invariably connected to politics, and that is invariably connected to vote banks. So then we also have this issue of vote bank politics, and I think this empty symbolism can be directly linked to vote bank politics as well. But obviously in the struggle, in the journey of a nation, we sort of make progress, and that's one more progress that we have to make. Guru, India gave rights to everyone in their constitution the day they became free, the day constitution came into existence. India has written a very progressive constitution. India has given herself a very progressive constitution. One man, one vote, one value. There is very strong affirmative action in place in India at the moment. And we have seen movements. You talked about President Draupadi Murmu, you talked about a lot of people who have reached those places. Yet, if we were to look at the statistics, given the statistics, we don't see Dalits at as many places as they should be according to their population. With this strong affirmative action in place, with strong, the constitution totally being with them, which does not discriminate, what do you think is holding back?
Again, so in my travels, I've also realized that the struggle of Dalits in India and the struggle of African Americans in India. So there are efforts of sort of creating a confluence, but we must understand that, like you mentioned, that the Constitution of India, affirmative action as a policy decision was included in the Constitution of India the day we got our independence. Special preference for scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, Dalits and Adivasis, the day we got independence. How can we encourage and cultivate more people from these disadvantaged communities in government-sponsored education and employment. Unfortunately, this is not similar when it comes to the case of African American in the United States. So there is the difference that you have a formal organized constitutional structure at the time of our independence for Dalits. And where have we reached? So when I say Draupadi Murmu, who did Draupadi Murmu succeed? Draupadi Murmu in the highest constitutional office succeeds a man from the Dalit community. A tribal lady, a woman
President
from the
Kovind.
tribal community succeeding a man from the Dalit community at the highest constitutional office. What does it tell you?
Yeah.
Howsoever symbolic it is, that young girl in backward region of Odisha or Chhattisgarh with the surname of Murmu, she is inspired.
Yes.
And this is what we need.
Yes.
So for us, it's easy to label any act as symbolism, but in the political landscape as well. Like, I consider myself a second generation beneficiary of constitutional affirmative action. Today, my upbringing, what changes I have seen, I can articulate myself sufficiently well. But there are people. There are more people, and how do we make them relevant stakeholders? There are institutions which are still far less representative.
Yeah.
But I'm happy that there are conversations happening about how to make media, civil society more socially diverse and more reflective of the social realities.
Yeah.
So that's very critical. And we must also realize that in the political landscape, like I mentioned about, for the first time, 3 Dalit women in the Council of Ministry in Uttar Pradesh, we need more such leadership, more such initiatives, more academic scholarship, more professors, more thinkers. And that is something which the process has started, but obviously the pace is something where we can have a discussion.
Yeah. For a minute now, Guru, I want you to wear your, because you're a political scientist as well, you are a political thinker, I want you to wear that cap for the moment. And let's just engage a little bit on where India is right now. It would not be an exaggeration to say that after 75 years, India is moving, and people who read New York Times and Washington Post may not agree with me, but I feel it's organic. It's organically moving from Nehruvian secularism to, you may call it Hindu nationalism, you may call it Hindutva, but it is definitely moving away from Nehruvian secularism to what I call Hindu nationalism. It is moving there. As a political scientist, do you see Dalit movement and Hindutva going hand in hand, or do you see a conflict there? The reason I ask you this question is because I've also seen Hinduism does get a lot of, and rightly so, for the caste discrimination. But a lot of people who have converted and moved to Islam or Christianity in India, they have not been able to get rid of the caste burden, even when they have changed the religion. So I want to, and this is not something that I'm saying this is a fact, and this has been proven many times with the help of proper research. I want to ask you, is Hindu nationalism and Dalit resurgence, is it at odds with each other, or do you think there is absolutely no conflict?
Interesting question, like so many questions I can. About the conversion part of it, like let's take it first. You look at the Dalit leadership across since our independence. Ambedkar, Babu Jagjivan Ram, Kanshi Ram, Mayawati, Ramvilas Paswan. Babu Jagjivan Ram, a devout Hindu.
Yes.
Kanshi Ram, never converted. Mayawati, never converted. Ramvilas Paswan, a devout Hindu. Ambedkar, he converts after much introspection in the last couple of months of his life. And he has categorically said, he chooses an Indic faith.
Yes.
He chooses a faith which is closest to his motherland, Buddhism. And you look at the narrative these days, so Buddhism is based on the two principles of peace and non-violence. Today, unfortunately, we have initiatives in India which are saying Bhim army. Such an oxymoron it is. So his life was based and dedicated on peace and non-violence. So the leadership of the Dalit community, they have sort of stayed within the Hindutva fold. So there is absolutely no question. Dalits are more Hindus than the upper caste Hindus. Let me put this very clearly. Dalits have been the Sanatani civilization and cultural soldiers. You go to India, you go to East India, there are many festivals. There is Chhat Puja, we worship sun. You see a Kamad Yatra, you see a Durga Puja, you see a Saraswati Puja. This is our expression, our cultural expression of in the mode of festivals. You do a statistical academic analysis, you would see the majority of Dalits are not only the torch bearers, they are leaders when it comes to these festivals.
Correct.
Where is the question? I'll give you a different perspective. There is a community, a Dalit community called Ram Nami Samaj in Chhattisgarh. So Ram Nami Samaj, because of some archaic practice, they were not allowed entry into the temple. What they did, friends, they inscribed the tattoo of Ram from head to toe. They said, if you don't allow us entry into your temple, I'll make my body my own temple.
Wow.
This is the level of faith, commitment, and dedication. So there is absolutely no question. Obviously, we have had some structural flaws in the course of our history, but at the same time, we had social reformers. We had someone like Kabir. We had someone like Ravidas who spoke about it and fought against it. So we need to look at it like this. And the second part of your question, which you said about how India at 75, and I respect these institutions which you just mentioned, the newspapers, the media houses, they're entitled to their own opinion. But McKinsey again is also entitled to their own opinion. It is McKinsey that has said that we are the 5th largest economy. And there is absolutely no denying that. And about the question of how in growing India, or the word which you used, Hindutva and social justice, or Hindutva and Dalit imagination, you cannot see them in two different silos. Hindutva and Dalit imagination or Dalit assertion is assertive. In a sense, you see the political expression. Since 2014, Dalits have formed the backbone of the present dispensation. 2014, 2017, 2019, 2022, if you look at the elections, and I really feel sad on occasions, when people at these institutions you mentioned, they questions the wisdom of the Indian voter. Indian voter friends are the smartest voters.
I agree with that.
That may be my bias and prejudice, but they are the smartest voters. You cannot sit like thousands of miles away and question on their wisdom. No, they did the wrong selection. They did the wrong election. So over the course of time, you'll see the vote share of this idea. The vote share of the present regime has constantly increased. It's on the push because people are seeing there is a Dalit president, there is an Adivasi president, there is a man from the backward class who is not an upper caste as the most powerful Prime Minister of India. The Council of Ministers, the Union Council of Ministers, the State Council of Ministers is far more socially diverse than it used to be ever. The Padma Shri, the Padma Bhushan, the civilian honors have democratized, which used to be given on the basis of some proximity 10 years ago. The presidential nominations to Rajya Sabha, we have Ilayya Raja from Tamil Nadu for the first time being sent to Rajya Sabha, the first Dalit from that art category. So this is what people are seeing. You can no longer befool them. You cannot dictate them from these newspapers. And we see a reflection of their assertion. We see a reflection of their aspiration when it comes to the political exercises.
Ultimately, in a democracy, you will have to look at the data around elections and around vote shares. And if you do, which I do as part of my job, I do look at the vote shares of this thing. And you do see the vote shares of BJP, and you see the vote shares, the Dalit vote shares, they're increasing. with every election, there are more and more Dalits who are voting for BJP because, as you said rightly, we cannot question their choice. They must be seeing something right about it. They must be seeing their aspirations being met.
That's actually a very pointed question and an issue which is really close to my heart. So, why BJP?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sitting in front of you. I come from the community, and I was told that I'm the youngest ever national spokesperson of any political party in the history of our politics. So if a Dalit is the face of the world's largest political party, do you think the community is not seeing that?
Yeah.
If a Dalit is the president, if in the organizational hierarchy, if the benefits of the government, there is a Swachh Bharat mission, there are toilets being constructed. In the crisis of COVID, India is the country to not only manufacture vaccines, but also successfully administer vaccines free of cost to everyone, regardless of caste and community.
Yeah.
We assumed a lot of bad things about India.
Yeah.
There will be a civil war-like situation.
Yeah.
But we saw what happened. People reposed faith. And that is where you see the reflection, what I say, the collective manifestation of Dalit assertion in the form of the government which we have today.
I call it the 14,000 feet view above. That's what I call it. When you look at from 14,000 feet above, everything seems small, everything seems disfigured, everything seems out of proportion. To really understand, you have to really come down from your 14,000 feet view and be there. So that's what I would recommend to everyone, to sort of travel to India, talk to people, make up your own mind, and see how the social justice movements are changing people and the changing face of the country. We've almost reached to the end of it. I just want to ask you two last questions, and then I'll go to the audience. And briefly, Guru, and this is a question that I often, sort of struggle with. Is the future caste-less society, or is the future a society where caste discrimination, of course, is completely annihilated, which is what we all fight for, but at the same time, if a social hierarchy may not be able, because there is class hierarchy also. Despite everything, we've not been able to get rid of class hierarchy also. So do you think some kind of hierarchies may always exist? But if we get discrimination out of the way, if there is full respect for there is full respect for the jobs that everyone does, a teacher is treated no different from a janitor, in terms of respect, then we will be moving towards a more equitable country.
You see, caste is going to remain. Caste as an institution, and I am of this opinion that caste as an institution has not been studied sufficiently. People do have opinions on caste. I have opinion on caste, but an honest academic work on caste is still missing. Caste is different. Caste is not race. Caste is not just classification. But eventually, the moment we start having an informed conversation on caste, we will see caste discrimination also going away. Caste discrimination still remains a reality. And like I said, I am not shying away from admitting this. But at the same time, we must also have a perspective on the positive side of the narrative, which unfortunately we are missing. We have movements of Dalit capitalism in India. You have movements where Dalits have gotten together and started something like Dalit Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Now Dalits are of the opinion, the young Dalits are saying that we want to become job givers, not job seekers. I can give you tens of such examples in India, in Gujarat, where Dalits have had corporations with a turnover of more than 1,000 crore. So that is something which is very remarkable. We have had sportspersons from the community, we have leadership in the university, in the academic spaces, in the political spaces, but yet, collectively, with one mission, We have to come together, start an honest conversation on caste, accept and acknowledge, yes, there is a problem. Absolutely no running from the fact. Yes, there is a problem, we accept there is a problem, and then work towards it together.
Fair. I want to ask you one fun question, and then we will move to the audience. If I were to tell you that you have an option of spending a weekend with one of these 18 profiles that you have, one of the 18 brilliant icons whose lives you have profiled, you have to spend one weekend with them, who would it be and why?
That's a very interesting question. I think it would be Kabir. Because Kabir comes with a very interesting worldview. He is from both the worlds, a backward class parent and a Muslim parent as well.
Yeah.
And how he sort of challenges the preconceived notions. He asks questions from the establishment.
Yeah.
And how sort of everything that he has said, like one of the saying is, Jati na pucho sadhu ki. Jati na pucho sadhu ki, पूछ लीजिए ज्ञान, मोल करो तलवार की, पड़ी रहन दो म्यान. Don't be concerned about caste.
Yeah.
Caste is irrelevant. But what we should actually be informed of, it's about the person, the individual.
Yeah.
That is something very critical. And obviously, if I had that option of that time machine to going back and spending a time with Kabir, I should be, like, it would be an honor for me to spend a couple of hours with him, and the thoughts which he has given, so many of them.
Yeah.
And I can go on and on. Matkar Maya ka Ahankar, and so many things Kabir has said that Kabir would be one such figure I would like to go back in time with.
I agree. I think I could spend a lifetime just listening to Kabir's poetry. With that, I will open the session. And do we have the microphones? And I will ask, if you have questions, please raise your hand. And once the microphone comes to you, please say your name and a very brief question, and no statements, please, a brief question. And because we are almost out of time, I will go to the gentleman there at the back, and then I will come to you, sir. And gentleman in the pink shirt. I don't have my glasses on, but pink shirt, yes.
Yeah, so my name's Yusuf, and I just wanted to ask, like you mentioned that there should be icons for Dalits in India, and it's great to have the positive narrative, but I just wanted your opinion, and having the victimization lens of the Dalits, do you think that's also a way for improvement, to show that there is scope for improvement, and just portraying the positive narrative shows a bit of a rosy picture compared to showing the victimization part of the Dalits, which shows there are still scope for improvement?
Yusuf, I don't deny, and nowhere in my presentation did I try to make a rosy picture of it. I started my conversation on how atrocious the discrimination has been, and it's been since centuries, since years. It's a social problem, not a political problem. What I try to propose from this project is to sort of present a view that we have had icons, and these icons, maybe because they were Dalits, they were not identified. Maybe because they came from the marginalized and the disadvantaged, they were not celebrated. It's time. It is good, not only for the Dalits, but for the world at large to at least know about them. And that is how. Whether positive or negative, I'm not going to make a value judgment out of it, but this scholarship must be done. At that same time, we must also acknowledge which is the problem at hand, and how do we constructively and positively engage with those problems.
Yeah. One more question right here.
I am a regular reader of the English newspapers from India, Times of India, Hindu, or Statesman. Okay, every 18 minutes, a Dalit is being attacked or even killed in India right now. Can you explain to me? Or the suicide of Rohit Bumla. Okay, the other Langesh, I forgot the name, in Karnataka. Can you explain me all those things? And the second question is, Dr. Ambedkar used to wear only Western dress all the time. That's the only picture I've seen him in about. Why he followed that Western suits and everything.
Two questions. He's saying that Dalit atrocities, we see
And
them
also the
all.
last question. And
No,
why
we
he even
only have time for this. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. That Dalit atrocities, we're still seeing them, and we acknowledge that. We agree. Why he's asking about why do we still see them in 2022?
That's unfortunate that we
Yeah.
still see them. It is a structural problem.
Yeah.
And that data, obviously, it's not as if today it started or a couple of years ago it started. Dalit atrocity has been the fact of Indian reality since before 1947.
Yeah.
It's happening, it has happened, but what is being done is the more important question. Like, is there a sort of reflection of the community in the political space? Is there space of articulation of the concerns and the aspirations of Dalits? Atrocity part is there, and there is absolutely no denial of that. If I deny that, that will be foolish on my part.
Right.
That's everywhere in the newspaper as well, but these are the same newspaper which are also saying initiatives like Dalit Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry,
Yeah.
about the rise of Draupadi Murmu, and how the rise of Draupadi Murmu succeeding Ramnath Kovind gives a sense of hope to
There is
hundreds and
also
thousands
that
of Dalits and
statistic,
tribals.
remind me, Guru, because I forget, I read it in your book, that the education in Dalits is spreading at a faster rate than it is spreading amongst the wider Indians at the moment. The way, there is a statistic that you mention in your book. So that is also there. Once education spreads, once, that's also a positive bit of narrative that we... His second question was, why do we always see Dr. Ambedkar in Western clothes?
That's a very good question. And obviously, because he wanted his community, his followers to follow him with this as well. That how, and the three words which is very central to Ambedkar is educate, organize, and agitate. So education was something which was very central to Baba Sahib Ambedkar's idea. And for him, his attire was a sense of education, was a sense of development to me.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. We'll have to end it right here. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. We were the very last, but I hope we were worth your time. And thank you again for being here.